Tánaiste, as you prepare for your next European outing, I think it would be remiss not to mention the fact that you're just back from the really ludicrous and outrageous presentation of the Nobel Peace Prize to the EU, and I think it was a shocking failure and missed opportunity of our government to not boycott this event and make a stance against the galling hypocrisy that a militarised EU which has participants in Iraq and Afghanistan and who have amongst their ranks some of the biggest arms manufacturers in the world will be granted the Nobel Prize is just actually a sick joke, to be honest. And I do think while the Taoiseach's presentation mentioned only a couple of lines about the important foreign policy issues which will be addressed at the Council meeting, I think it is really important that the Government departs from its complicity in really a lack of action in some of these areas, and I just want to touch on a number of them as other deputies have. I think the whole area of Palestine and the Israeli offensive against Gaza and the continuing extension of Israeli settlements on the ground in the West Bank is an outrage. And saying that is not enough, particularly when the EU does the opposite and continues to trade and be the biggest trading partner of Israel. It's conflicting signals. On the one hand, you're giving them a little tap on the shoulder, and on the other, you're embracing them with open arms. It simply isn't good enough any longer when the Israelis respond in a very determined, upfront, two-fingers way, if you like, when the UN votes in regard to the Palestinian state, and their answer is just to extend the settlement programme. Now, you can talk about it or you can do something about it. And as Ireland prepares for the EU presidency, I think there has to be considerably more done in this regard. Words aren't good enough any longer. The Irish Congress Trade Unions and others have called for a ban on goods from the settlements, but at the very least the implementation of EU regulations regarding consumer branding and so on should be done in terms of this area. But I have to say I don't have enormous confidence, particularly in light of your antics in the European Parliament yesterday and the situation mentioned by Deputy Crowe with the conclusion of the free trade agreement with Colombia and Peru. And I have to say this more than anything is an indictment of the government and its actions in Europe. You know, there's been a lot of attention in the media recently about the Labour Party's betrayal in terms of domestic policy, but you should be really ashamed of yourselves in terms of what went on with the ratification of this agreement with Colombia, when every single trade union federation, NGO and human rights organisation lobbied on you, demanded of you that in light of the systematic abuse of human rights and workers' rights in Colombia, that this agreement would not be ratified.
1 minute.
On the other side, you were of course lobbied by big business. No surprises for guessing whose interests were supported and vindicated by agreeing that agreement. And it is an absolute disgrace, and you in particular, Tánaiste, given your background in opposition, should be ashamed of this. But there is no surprise, because in actual fact that is the mark of Europe, not just in its foreign policy but it's in its domestic policy. There is a worsening economic crisis in Europe. There is a growing instability that has been referred to by other deputies, and it is a consequence of the continuation of austerity, which has had calamitous impact on the peoples across Europe. And unless you address those policies and deal with the issue of private debt being foisted onto the shoulders of the public, then we can't have a better Europe, but a recipe for ongoing instability and crisis.